Cool. Okay. So if everyone just wants to maybe like go around and like say your name, just the panel members, and then um maybe just like your identity and how you identify and pronouns, that sort of stuff. Okay, so I mean I can start. I'm Ayana. She, her, hers. Yeah, I'm a bisexual student with disabilities, so I think these issues very much impact my life and are very important to be talked about. Okay.
So I'm Evan, he, him pronouns. I identify as queer and trans, and my disabilities are chronic pain plus PTSD symptoms.
My name's Ashton, he, him pronouns. I am queer and trans, and I'm a physically disabled person and an autistic person.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I didn't mention my disabilities. I have connective tissue issues, along with a bunch of like conditions that come with it. Okay. So thinking about queerness and disabilities, how have your disabilities been tied to your identity? And how has this impacted, like how have your queer identities impacted, say, your mental health, which then can tie into your physical health? So I know at least with me, I think just coming into queerness recently, it wasn't really like something I considered myself to be for a very long time, because I was like, oh, how could I be queer? Like I like men, like what, how does that work? And then I feel like the more that I looked into it, the more that I learned about it, the more that I was like, okay, I feel like this is very much it's very much in my wheelhouse. And just thinking about like bisexuality, I think it's very similar in terms of disability. Just thinking about like, I mean, I look like an able-bodied person. I look like I could be straight, but it's like you can't really just assume that, and everyone just kind of does. And it's like, yeah, I think especially thinking about, I mean, I think a lot of the mental health issues I had didn't necessarily stem from like queerness, just because, you know, I can pass as straight, and I have that privilege. It's just mainly thinking about my disabilities and how they were impacting my mental health. But I feel like that kind of also ties into like how I viewed myself and how I was willing to call myself to other people.
Yeah, I'm somebody who my mental health self-diagnoses as well as formal diagnoses came before I realized I was queer. And so part of that was that part of my, I have a lot of anxiety. And so there's a lot of like this like spiraling thoughts, a lot of, self-checking. And so it took me a very long time to realize I was some kind of queer, because I was always like, well, am I sure? Oh, well, am I just doing this XYZ, like insert whatever reason that I could try to talk myself out of it. And so then it became a lot of like tug of war between accepting myself as a queer person and accepting myself as somebody who has anxiety, and but that doesn't negate the fact that I'm queer. I didn't like spiral myself into believing it. It's just I coexist with these two things.
For me, like, it is very hard to think of like my experience as like a person without like thinking about my experience as a disabled queer person. I've been like, I've known I was disabled for a very, very long time, longer than I've known that I was queer. And because I had such complex medical issues at such a young age, I when I came out, I was kind of met with a like, you were already too much, like, and now we have to deal with this. And it was kind of like a lot of compartmentalization of these identities. And then unfortunately, like we've had a lot of experience like navigating the healthcare system, but it went a different route where somehow like my queerness was labeled as like mental illness and just another thing to treat. And that is, it's like, oh, this is too much, or let's focus on one thing at a time. And it was just used to like dehumanize me and break down aspects of my identity. And I'm very glad now that I can exist with these important aspects of my identity and not feel the need to like censor those for people.
Yeah, I know, definitely. Just thinking about queerness, I was like talking to some of my friends and I was like, but how do I know? Like, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm queer, and then be like, am I just like stealing someone's identity, or like trying to, it was like the imposter syndrome, and just kind of thinking about how those things tied together. And they were finally like, they're like, well, if you're thinking about it and asking these questions, you probably are. It's just like, you can definitely get in your head and get all lost in your train of thought. It can be tricky to navigate.
I feel like it's like a lot of like mindset of being treated like your identities are an inconvenience to those around you. And that's just really not the case.
Yeah, especially when you have multiple marginalized identities, it can definitely compound. And like, it's important to acknowledge like not everyone has the privilege to be able to come out actively and openly. And it's definitely something that needs to be like intersectional. We need to have conversations about how this impacts everyone, not just for example, like a white queer person. It's got to be everyone is accepted, and everyone has to have a seat at the table. Okay, so just in terms of like both your disabilities and your queerness, like what resources have helped, and what are some issues that you face in trying to get the help that you need?
Personally, I am very lucky, I guess, in a way. My healthcare experience has been relatively smooth as far as disability and queerness can be. Like I was only able to start hormones because I was going through Shaw. And like the provider I see there is like fantastic. She's like, oh yeah, sure. Like, informed as well as very accepting, which helped validate me a whole lot because I was expecting the worst. So I was like, oh, she's gonna like quiz me on like all these things. And she was like, no, like if you say you are, you are. And I'm like, oh, it's that simple, cool. But then when it comes to like disability, part of my chronic pain, I've had chronic pain for more than half of my life. And because it's not a simple answer, like there's no like, oh, you have this thing, there you go. It's more like, I have chronic pain, cool, or like, chronic fatigue and things like that. And that's when things get a little bit difficult, because it was like, as Ashton said, like they try to be like, okay, well, let's focus one thing at a time. It's like, but they all connect. So, needing to handle all of it, but also that doesn't always work.
As far as resources, I think it's very important, like about what we were talking about a little bit before this panel started, about like community care first and foremost. I feel like a lot of people don't think about that as a resource, but like access to housing, access to healthcare, to like a safe living environment, healthy food, like these are scary for people to talk about as public health concerns. I feel like there's a lot of like still like subscribing to the idea of, oh, take care of yourself, go to therapy, all that stuff. And this is like a deflection of the responsibility that we have for taking care of our communities. It's isolating to put all of that on someone who is already struggling. And I also think it's irresponsible, kind of a cop-out. Like more like actionable like items, because I know that that's like a big like ask, would just be like making sure that like the barriers that like our like UConn community has to accessing care, like what we were talking about through the CSD, is not like, it shouldn't be harder than it has to be. Like the biggest resources I haven't found in a healthcare setting, basically the biggest resources I've found have been in my communities.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I know, especially with disabilities, like seems like people that have the same conditions as I do, like as I was saying before we started the panel, just thinking about doctors and their ability to diagnose, a lot of it is unfortunately the burden is put on people with disabilities. I mean, I know I went through many years of being told that I was like completely normal, like there's nothing wrong with you. Oh, you're just making this up. And it turns out like, oh, you've got like 10 different disorders. And they all impact you. And especially just being like someone who looks able-bodied, it's like, oh, I mean, the other reason I didn't think I was in all this pain was because it's constant. So it's like, it's just normal. Like there's nothing wrong. And especially thinking about like queerness, that sort of stuff. If I didn't have those community spaces, like I wouldn't have like felt comfortable like talking about it or identifying as such if I didn't have the people that I did at the time to talk to about this. Yeah, it's just like I don't know how else you would find out about these different identities, because it can be isolating if you think you're the only person or the only one who has these issues in terms of like disability, and then also like these different identities in terms of queerness. Yeah, I think especially thinking about all of the harmful bills that are being passed now regarding like trans youth, and then like the Don't Say Gay bills. It's really difficult because how are you going to identify as something if you don't even know that it exists? And like, how are you going to be okay even just like being nice to someone who's queer? How are you going to be able to interact with them if you don't know anything about the identity and you're told like it's something that's so taboo and sinful when it's not. It's been around since like the beginning of time. If you look through history, there have been queer people everywhere. So why should we make it something that we don't learn about in a school setting? Like you learn about heterosexual relationships and sex, so why should you not learn about queer sex and relationships? And it doesn't even necessarily, like I've heard people bring it up like, oh, it can be it's pedophilia to talk about this with kids, but it's like if you look at all the media that we see, heteronormativity is pushed upon people since the day they pop out of the womb. It's like, oh, he's a ladies' man. Like, oh, you're gonna have to hide her up when she gets older. Like, why is this something that's not seen as pedophilia? But when we talk about like a man and a man in a relationship, it's just not okay. And that's so offensive and something the kids can't understand. Yeah, so then the next one, this might not be applicable to everyone, but like, has your queer identity impacted your healthcare treatment? Has it impacted how your doctors view you?
So I have a lot to say on this actually. So when I came out as trans, like 2 weeks after I came out as trans, I was like sent to conversion therapy in Utah for over a year. And at this point I was already like had documented disability and was on medications. Obviously it was not competent. I experienced a lot of medical neglect there, unfortunately, in addition to everything. But since just in my normal everyday encounters, I'll go get like my blood drawn, and someone will kind of like see that my gender marker might be different, where I was going through a name change with an insurance card, and they'll be like, we don't have this test. And then like you prod a little bit and they have the test, they just don't want to do it for you. Or you just get kicked out of a healthcare setting saying, oh, no one's available to see you. And I'm like, I made this appointment 2 weeks ago. I was at a problem when I walked in the door. And you have to know what to say and what buttons to press for people to take you seriously. And I am lucky that I've had that experience from being disabled for so long. But a lot of people who don't know their way around the systems would be like, oh yeah, oh okay, you're busy, you don't want to fill my prescription, okay, thank you, bye. And at the end of the day, I'm still going to need my medication regardless. It's been a lot because like I'll go to like just my general care provider, and as someone who's presenting like outwardly queer, I'll have all my documentation, everything in line, and they'll be hesitant to take me as seriously as they would a cisgender patient, and also an able-bodied patient, because again, I'm young, and I've been doing this for a long time, so it's not new. But then they'll like see kind of that history of like the mental health stuff, even though it was just like institutional abuse, and they'll be more hesitant to take me seriously. So the same systems that are harming me once are harming me again and again.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, obviously I'm like cis passing, that sort of stuff. So I haven't had too many issues, but just in terms of thinking about how you identify, and if it's a different gender than what you were biologically like born as, people can really question that, and it can lead to a lot of problems. I know it's super hard even to get the testing that I need normally, and that's with my insurance having me down as the correct gender. And just thinking about even like migration, that sort of stuff, things get compounded, and it gets a lot more difficult for people to be able to leave harmful situations, or be a refugee, coming to a different country, or even like thinking about getting medical treatment at a different country that might have doctors that are better equipped to handle your issues. That can all sort of compound if you identify as something different than what your ID says. And luckily now they're like sort of, some states have some ability to mark yourself down as like X as a gender, which is, it's obviously a great first step, but I think a lot needs to be done to make sure that everyone is able to get the treatment that they need.
I think it's just a lot, because I mean, like, it's kind of messed up that like if I'm like on my way to an emergency room, if I'm like experiencing a medical emergency, I have to have all these things in a row. And I also have to be thinking about, what do I look like right now? How do I come across as professional when I'm literally going to the emergency room in extreme pain? How, like, how is it safest for me to present right now? Like, how much of my personal life is going to be under scrutiny just because I'm showing up for, maybe it could be a broken ankle, and then they'll dive right into things that they're not used to seeing people like us. And frankly, I mean, I use he him pronouns. I am trans, but I'm not binary trans. I would consider myself genderqueer. I would probably never feel safe using the X gender marker. Why would I walk into a hospital that's already hurt me and openly declare to them that I've like changed my gender marker to be non-binary? That is terrifying.
Yeah, I was only able to get the gender affirming care here at UConn. I had one experience where I tried, where this was, gosh, 2017, 2018. I was living in Texas at the time. But again, as I mentioned before, the panel was near a major city. And I was going to the doctor because I was really ill. unrelated. But as we're kind of like wrapping up, I asked him, I'm like, do you have experience with transgender patients? He got very visibly uncomfortable. And he was basically like, yeah, well, I have a patient, but they were already diagnosed, and I pretty much just like continue their prescription. Like, and I was like, okay, thank you. And the medication he gave me for being ill also didn't work. So I don't know even what to say about that. But that was the only time I was in a comfortable enough place where I felt secure enough that I could bring it up. And prior to that and after that, for a significant period of time, I was deeply in the closet, and I didn't disclose anything. And they didn't ask. It was very much like the don't ask, don't tell, where I was like, I'm not going to say anything, and we're going to move on, and I'm just going to get through this appointment, and we're going to go home.
Yeah. I mean, I think along those lines, it's really important that doctors understand these identities and how they're going to impact the medical treatment that you get. Because thinking about if doctors don't know how to properly diagnose you when you do have these identities, that they could give you a medication that would interact with treatment given by other doctors. There could be a lot of things that interplay that lead to just your disability being really negatively impacted. And also just thinking about mental health, like these are issues that people face. It's not like it's one person in a million, and even if it was, they should still be able to have their identities be like supported and have the tools that they need to be able to deal with things. Even like thinking about therapists and stuff, it's very, very difficult to try to find therapists or psychiatrists who really understand queer identities and understand how to interact with people in a professional but also helpful way. So it seems like a lot of the work has to be done on our part to try to find the answers, and it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really think that like not just like therapists, doctors, anyone who works in healthcare, having compassion and just basic understanding for patients of different backgrounds is harm reduction. Not understanding why someone might be visibly uncomfortable in your space when the space has been unwelcoming for so long, and then continuing to like antagonize or overanalyze like their fear at what your response might be as their provider. There's a clear power imbalance that care providers hold, and it's something that we have to recognize, and something that, like, as someone who's going into the field of psychology, like our mental health system is so carceral as it is right now. And I know that, like, even in my own therapy, not even in my own healthcare, like physical healthcare, when I mention that I'm disabled, that is also really misunderstood by therapists. You have to go to one place for one thing, one place to another thing, and no one's kind of seeing you as a full person.
Yeah, it's hard to have like doctors and therapists that kind of understand your whole identity. So it's like you have to see 20 different people for one issue. It can make everything a lot harder and a lot
They don't
more.
even talk to each other.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I don't know. I know, because especially with COVID sort of impacting the ability to get together, has there been issues with accessibility at different rallies, different protests, that sort of stuff? Even just in terms of thinking about like feminism in general, I know that there's a lot of people that that kind of exclude very, very much of the population. They say like, oh, trans women aren't women, trans men aren't men. And that's, yeah, that's something that unfortunately is very common. How have you guys experienced any of that?
Personally, I am very fortunate in that I came out publicly, or mostly publicly, once I was in a college setting, um, where people don't say anything directly to you. If so, I've been very fortunate in that regard. Um, but that doesn't mean I haven't not seen it. I was somebody who learned a lot on the internet, and I learned a lot about most things on the internet. And so as when I learned about the existence of trans identities, almost immediately after you get the TERFs, you get the people who are saying LGBT, but not like that. And it's, which didn't help the whole like figuring it out for myself process as well. Um, so I've been fortunate enough not to have it directly, but it did come up in the very formative years of me figuring out my identity, which is in some ways worse. If you can put that on like a comparable scale, but like it's a different experience, but I think it's also a very prominent.
I am someone who came out like when I was really like younger, but a lot of that also resonates with me, Evan. Like I know that like, so when I was younger, it was like, oh, we don't want you at our house because how are we gonna like, you can't play with our kid or XYZ. But it's also like there's no rallies to go to, there's no one to take me. How can I like stand for a long time? I don't know anyone here. And then like just knowing, like feeling like there's really no other option like for me to exist, because I have not really seen like trans like role models existing and just living naturally. And I mean I am openly trans, and so is my partner. So we deal with this like every day. But it's just it's so complicated because I mean like everyone's going to have that kind of like stage where they're going to be like met with that. And I mean, it doesn't matter if I came out like 6 years ago or if I came out last year, like it's unfortunately a really prevalent part of the issues that we're currently facing.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned earlier that you were like the accessibility coordinator for Unchained. I think that the rallies that were held this year, this was like some of the only ones where I heard people saying like, is everyone does everyone have the accommodations that they need to be able to participate? Like they actively mentioned like disabilities and trying to accommodate that, and I thought that was really great. And I know just in a lot of my research, especially in my WAGS classes, thinking about rallies, they go on for a long time, protests go on for a long time. There's not really the option to sit down. There's not really the option to just not walk with everyone else. And in planning things, they don't have people with disabilities at the head of the planning committee trying to make sure that that's one of the priorities of the event.
I'm really hopeful that like in continuing the work that we're doing with Unchained, that we're going to be able to get like proper like chairs for people at rallies and everything. We really like want this to be as like it is our campus. We don't obviously a lot of the reason that we're speaking up in this kind of in this way is because we don't feel heard through the channels that currently exist. And it would be awful if we only amplified certain voices and others could not attend or have space in these rallies. So I know we're trying to make sure that whoever needs space has space with us. And I really appreciate it in our conversation. I don't know if any of you were at the walkout for trans rights. But at the walkout for trans rights, I was speaking, and we made like a really big point in like the entire rally to cover intersectional queerness. Like we wanted to make sure that we're not just standing here representing trans college students at the University of Connecticut. It's trans kids in states who are being under attack. It's trans women of color, trans sex workers, disabled trans people. All of these people hold like intersectional identities that are actively disenfranchised and spoken over. And it would be kind of like a slap in the face to say we only like support one kind of trans person. And I think you see that a lot, as Evan was mentioning, in like the online spaces. It's like, this might be too much for me, but this is fine. And that's not for you to decide.
Yeah, and I think this is like some of the reasons why we need more non-trans people to be advocates for trans individuals, just because as a trans person, you're automatically targeted by the police, targeted for violence. You automatically have a target on your back. So it's not possible for some people to go or to feel comfortable if they don't have people there supporting them, knowing that there's people that are going to be like watching out for them, and that they won't be targeted as directly as if they were going by themselves. Yeah, I think it's definitely something I wish more people would be accepting of, especially like if you accept that people can be born gay, like why can people not be born trans? It's like a very, very similar identity. Why is it so excluded and pushed aside?
I feel like my queerness and my disability, I've made the choice in the recent like year or two, because for a long time I was carrying all this weight, and in some really like hostile environments. But I since being able to like kind of be firm in who I am, I've kind of like actively tried to make the decision to not concern the opinions of people who don't know what I have to go through on a daily basis. Like, no, if you're going to ask me a detailed question about my identities, you're not going to get an answer because I don't know you one. And for a longest time, I felt like I did owe people. Like, oh, you want me to defend my humanity for you again? Yeah, I'll do it. But like, that's not fair to us. We deserve better than that.
Yeah, exactly. I think about like people in my family. I know like a lot of my grandmother, we were pretty sure that she was like a trans or gay individual, but she just didn't feel comfortable coming out. So she was always like wearing more male presenting clothes and had short hair. And she like she would live in a house with her very close female friend. And just thinking about the fact that she didn't feel comfortable coming out or bringing this up to people, it's very heartbreaking to think like she never got that chance, she never got the ability to do that because of just the hugely negative impact that society has had on that vision of what it means to be gay or to be trans. Okay, so then thinking about identities, what are some like common misconceptions that people have about identities, and like how has this impacted you?
I can go off of this for a bit. So I'll try to be brief. So I earlier I said that I identified as queer, which is true. I also tell people that I'm bi. It is within the last 6 or so months, actually, that I figured out that while I am still bi, I am not attracted to men. Figured that out at the age of 27. And so I think that's one thing was like people don't understand that like your identity evolves as you evolve. And then like you get the people who are like, well, bi only means men and women. It's like, first of all, shut up, sit down. I'm talking. I say I am. Accept that. Move on. And then one thing that and this is like a two-part thing. Where one, people assume that using the term bisexual is inherently transphobic. Wrong. Moving on. And one thing is that something I found very difficult was that the being trans, people assume what your experience is, and that is that at a young age, you know, you knew when you were very young, like you always, you know, you rebelled against your given gender, like et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't have that experience, that exact experience, you are not trans. I am somebody who realized I was trans at 19. And it's only in hindsight that I was like, oh, like 11, 12, I was probably like, something's not right. But prior to that, I can say with like moderate comfort that I was a girl when I was a child. But that doesn't mean anything about my current identity. And people tend to be very hesitant about using that kind of language. Even myself as a trans person, I hesitate using that language about my own experience and my own body. So it's a very weirdly like nuanced thing. Like language is so important. It's very particular.
For misconceptions, I find most of my misconceptions are related to my disabilities, because I mean, I don't, it's not the same every day, and it doesn't come up in a lot of able-bodied spaces because they're frankly uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with the way that I exist, and when it's kind of noticeable, then it's kind of seen as dramatic. But I mean, like, if you think about it, like, as someone who has like broken my leg or broken my ankle before, that's less pain that I deal with every day. But people are like, oh, when do you get your cast off? Oh my God, I can help you, all that kind of stuff. Because there's an end date. Like, there's recovery in sight. They have no idea kind of what it means. To just like, I know that this is a condition that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. I don't know what the rest of my life is going to look like with this condition. And I have had a lot of time to come to terms with that. It is the insensitivity that I get from people who are able-bodied, who don't see 90% of it. That I mean, like, you don't know what I kind of am dealing with, so you don't get to make a judgment like that. And then it's also weird on the flip side because, like, as a disabled person who was disabled from a young age, like, there's the infantilization piece. So when I came out as gay or as trans, it was like oh no, you're too young to know what you want, like, kind of thing. And then no one would kind of like affirm that this is kind of like I'm allowed to be more than one thing. And just because people don't understand it does not mean that that's like incorrect. You would have to kind of like keep pushing things down, and things would keep coming back up. Like, I even had a doctor like say to me, like, when I came out as trans, unfortunately, before I had that like really awful experience, that I had only come out because I felt like my disability made me unlovable. And I was like, that's a weird take for you to say as an able-bodied white man, as a cis man who's in a position of power right now, talking to me like that. And at the time, I knew that that was wrong, but I was also a child. So in like, how could I voice that? And the answer was I had no possible way to do that. Because I mean, here it is, like, an able-bodied person putting his words to my experiences, and I know that they're not matching up. But at the end of the day, who are they going to believe?
Yeah, I know. Even just thinking about like trans identities as, again, like the same family member I was having the conversation with, and they were like, oh, I'm fine with that, but like, why do trans athletes have to compete, yada yada yada. And like, if they want to be a trans athlete, like, why not get the surgery? It's like, why do you have to get a surgery to identify as trans? Why do you have to get a surgery? First of all, that's expensive. That takes time. That takes a lot of money. It takes like coming from a place of privilege where you have that option. And also, why is that something that's pushed on people? Like, if you feel comfortable without having it, why should you feel like you need to have the surgery to be seen as like an actual, like the actual gender that you identify as? Especially like, what is it other people's business what you have in your pants? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And I think even in more like in terms of disabilities, like, again, I have that same invisible disability concept, and a lot of people, again, just see me as able-bodied. So I see people like eyeing me up when I get on the elevator and like go one flight up the stairs, and it's like, oh great, now I have people judging. And it's not like I can just be like, hey, I'm disabled. Like, and especially like, I know a lot of people who have the same condition that I have and have these mobility issues. They see like, oh, you have a handicap sticker. Like, why are you walking? Like, how are you walking if you're handicapped? Or like, they'll see people in wheelchairs, but they're able to move their legs or like stand up. It's like, just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean that you don't have function of your legs. It doesn't mean like you can't walk. It just means that sometimes maybe you're not able to walk, or you're only allowed to walk or stand up for a small amount of time before it gets to be too much. Why does it have to be in this yes or no box? Everything is kind of like a spectrum. It's not just like a binary disabled or not. Like, some days I can be totally fully functional and feel like I don't have disabilities. And then some days it's like, I can't get out of bed. I can't do anything. And people need to understand that everything is like changing. It changes day to day basis. And especially even just thinking about disabilities, I know a lot of the misconceptions just come from, like, I know for me at least, it's like fear of talking about my issues, because it's like, oh, am I going to be too much? Like, is this too stressful? Because I did have some, like, a group of friends that I had say, like, when I was getting through the process of getting diagnosed for my conditions, and one of the subsets of my connective tissue disorder is like a vascular condition where you would die by the age of 40. And I was just really stressed. And I didn't really even mention it that much. I mentioned like I was really stressed and I was having all these issues because of it. And they were like, I can't be friends with you anymore. Like, this is too much. Like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't have the time to think about this. And so there's just like this fear in the back of my head always, like, if I talk about this, like, are people gonna like think I'm just too depressing, and like they don't want to spend the time or energy to deal with this.
Yeah, it's really a preoccupation with our bodies, like either way, like as a trans person, as a disabled person, like it's so hard just to like constantly be under scrutiny for things that are outside of your control, to be like too much for like having health issues that are misunderstood, or for having a body that is misunderstood, and feeling like I know when I was like more able-bodied passing, or more like cis passing, that I was not it. Like, you meet a new person and they suddenly, like, when they figure out, oh, you're trans or you're disabled, it just opens up a bunch of questions that I don't want to answer, questions that I know you would not feel comfortable asking like your cis able-bodied friends. And so why is it okay for you to ask me? But then when I share of like my own like choice, like with people who like I trust, they're like, oh, well, actually that's a little bit much for me. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. But this is every day of my life. So where is that like outlet?
Yeah, and this is something that like I struggle with actively, and that twofold. One is that my physical disability, like my chronic pain and fatigue, because they do fluctuate, and like there are days where I'm fine, and there are days where I'm not. And you do get that like almost like imposter syndrome of like, oh well, am I, because mine is not diagnosable. I get very hung up on language, so diagnoses tend to be very important to me because it's a way of like validating my experience. And then convert like alongside that, I mentioned before that my part of my disability is also PTSD symptoms. So like anxiety, depression, amongst other things. And it took me a long time, and it's still taking me a long time. It's still something I'm still processing, that mental health and like mental illness is a disability. Disability is not strictly meant to be physical. Or even like, a couple of my siblings are severely dyslexic. And so that growing up, I understood that's a reading disability. Like I understood that as a disability. But I couldn't connect the word disability with my experience because mine fluctuated. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I definitely I understand that quite a lot. And just thinking about like, again, like coming back to that anxiety piece, it's like, am I making this up? Like, is this all just in my head? Especially if you've had doctors your whole life being like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. This test says you're fine. It can definitely come down to that. And again, like I also have that PTSD. So it's like it took me for like quite a lot of my life to even be like, okay, I was abused. Okay, like I have these issues. And especially if you think about it, if you tell someone like, oh, you have PTSD, they're like, oh, what war are you in? Like I wasn't in a war, but there's other things that can traumatize you. And it doesn't necessarily, PTSD isn't just like, oh, I hear a loud noise and get spooked. It's like there are very specific triggers for things. And just because something would trigger one person with the same situation doesn't mean it would trigger the next person with that same condition.
I talked to, I have been very fortunate where I've had two different therapists. And my previous therapist, love her to absolute pieces. But she was a trauma specialist. And I had been seeing her for about a year, and she was writing me my letters for UConn accommodation, which was very sweet of her. And she sent them to me so I could like read them over and all of that. And it was the first time where she had written down like, I am seeing Evan for symptoms of PTSD. And I spoke with her after I submitted it, and I was like, you're what? And she was like, just a question. I specialize in PTSD. Why do you think you were talking to me? And it just gave this like weird perception where I was like, oh, that's me. I count. Interesting. Yeah.
I really feel that, Evan, because like literally, I also like in a weird way, like this is kind of fucked up. But I consider myself fortunate that I was diagnosed with my physical disabilities first, because I knew that if I had like any mental health thing on the record when I was like going through the diagnosis process, it would have been a lot worse, because of the bias in healthcare. And unfortunately, a lot of like the PTSD is from that like abuse after I came out. But something I did not know until recently, until like 3 years ago, and I mean I've been kind of like dealing with the mental health effect from that for a very long time now, is that like my physical body was like hurting, and I was so focused on that I was not acknowledging kind of what was happening, because I felt like it was too much. So it again eventually got to the point where it was so untreated, I started having seizures, and I did not even know that could happen to you from like just a mental health condition. And I did not know that like brains were that powerful, but again, it's been 3 years, and now I've been having seizures for 3 years. And it's kind of remarkable to me, like the lengths that your body and your brain will go to survive for you. And I'm very, very thankful that I've been able to kind of get to this point and be able to like kind of exist in a space like UConn and have conversations like this. There's just a lot of like things that you don't think about behind the scenes, especially when like, I mean, like if you're used to like, oh, this blood test came back fine, we're not even going to test you for something and we might not even know what it is. Or if you're used to like, oh, it wasn't like that bad, it doesn't fit into like what my understanding of something being that bad is, like you kind of internalize that kind of like self-gaslighting, and it's like all the time it's like, well, listen, am I overreacting or is that a hate crime? I find myself thinking about that like a lot. I'm like, oh well, they were legitimately that was legitimate danger just there, and now I'm being like, oh no, that was fine, it was my bad, whoops.
Yeah, exactly. I totally get that. And then even just like come back to that blood test concept, like I know I had a doctor, and my mother was getting diagnosed with the disorder that we had. And so that's like kind of sort of how I found out that I had all of these issues, because they were looking into her. Um, so for a while they were like, okay, it's probably like a thyroid issue. So I got a thyroid blood test as well as my mother. And then the next year they were like, oh, it's probably parathyroid, because she was getting tumors in her jaw. So I asked my doctor for the parathyroid blood test, and she was like, why would you need that test? I gave you a blood test last year. Like, why would you need a new test this year? Like, it's a different condition. Just because one condition was ruled out, like, why would you stop testing for all the other ones? Just doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, like some things like I mean, like you can see a broken bone on an x-ray, but if the x-ray comes back clean and you're still having pain, they're like, well, not my problem anymore suddenly. Or and that's not a very like, not a very human way to conduct healthcare. If I'm being honest, it's very because then the next jump is always like, oh, you must be crazy. And like existing in a medical space before I existed in kind of like a mental health space. I mean, I wouldn't call it a mental health space. No. Yeah. There was obviously no access to medical care. And that you should not like come out of a situation like a healthcare or mental health situation or doctor situation worse than you went in. And I don't think that that should be a controversial statement.
Yeah, I feel that that exact example that you gave about, you know, having a broken bone, but they don't find anything, not their problem. That is exactly why my chronic pain was not taken seriously for the first 10 years. And ironically, it was only because of during the pandemic, um, instead of going home to live with my family, I lived with my partner. Um, and so she was able to see me in pain. And I was like, oh, like, it's fine. Like, this happened before. It'll pass in like a couple days. And she was like, no. And so she, you know, took me to the doctor and they did scans, and obviously they didn't find anything because they never do. Um, but she was like, you know, and they were like, oh, well, maybe you should follow up with the specialist. And I'm always so physically and mentally tired in general, but then also like adding in like the medical and like, you know, all the, I have to explain myself. And I was like, no, it's fine. And she was like, no, like we're gonna get to the bottom of this. And so we went to the specialist, and actually, after 4 visits, because the first 3 visits were with the nurse practitioner, who was a lovely woman, was not helpful. The doctor came in and like within like 5 minutes of talking to me, he was like, oh, you have this. Like if you do this like simple exercise, like you will feel better. And he's like, oh yeah, like, you know, like my wife has this as well. And like, you know, gave me that like, this is normal, this is treatable, we can go from here, rather than being like, try the steroid and see if it works.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Especially thinking about like conditions, a lot of conditions don't have proper research conducted. They don't have a test that says this is what it is. There's no definitive scale saying like, oh, you have this and to this level, so you do this. Like there's not treatments, there's not stuff. Um, and a lot of stuff, there's no when you do medical tests, it's in a very specific position. They don't do it when you're moving around. They don't do it like how you would normally function. Um, and they don't try to like elicit those symptoms from you. So I know like with my vascular issues, they never did any of those practical tests. They just did like nerve conduction studies. They did like blood tests, all that sort of stuff. And then years later, when I found a doctor who actually like was willing to do hands-on stuff and be like, okay, let's try to see if this makes your symptoms come up. And then like I went to her not even like going to her for that condition, and she managed to be like, "Oh, I found a reason for why you're having so many issues." And it just like magically came up. And then also, if you think about it, I know a lot of people say like healthcare, oh, it's so great. We shouldn't have socialized healthcare because like we would have to wait longer to get treatments. I know at least for my conditions, I was passing out 3 times a day for months on end. Um, and it took me like 6 months to get in to see a neurologist. And when I did get in, I was given 15 minutes on the doctor's lunch break. There are just not specialists anywhere. I know, especially for the vascular conditions. I went to a vascular doctor and they said, "Oh well, I don't know anything about this. I'm not qualified. Like you're too complicated." So then they're like, "Oh, we're gonna look for a doctor near you, maybe in Boston, yada yada yada." I went back the next time. They were like, "Oh, there are actually no specialists within like 5 hours, plane or car ride from here." Um, so it's just like thinking about that sort of stuff, and then also thinking about especially now healthcare, they've kind of moved towards like a very fast, you get in, you see the doctor for 2 seconds and then you leave. um, and like you're not able to get the information in 2 minutes. You're not able to get like a good history, get a good anything in that small amount of time. And that's just because insurance companies are like, we want to get the most for our buck, like let's keep it through, yada yada yada. And then also thinking about issues with diagnoses, especially with pain conditions. Like I also have a pain condition, and my mom as well. And she was hit by a drunk driver in a car when she was in high school and herniated several discs in her back. But the doctors thought that she was just trying to get pain meds, so they didn't believe her. They didn't do any tests. Um, and then months later, when they finally found it out, they're like, "Oh, it's gotten to the point where like we don't think you're ever going to be able to walk again." Um, and they literally told her, one of my mom's doctors said, "If you were a horse, I would take you out to the pasture and shoot you." And it's just like, these are the people that are controlling the medical treatment that we get, controlling like essentially how our life is going to go. Just doesn't really make much sense.
It's that a lot of that resonated with me, especially because for the conditions that there are like really no tests for, there are also likely no cures for. And it's a process of elimination, which means you're going to have to come back here 10, 12 times. And each time you're going to get charged for a new test that they're going to do. And at the end, they're going to say, well, you might have this, you might have this. We don't know for sure. And there's also nothing we can do. But you have to have all of that. You have to get all those tests. You have to see all those doctors. You have to travel all that time, take off work if you're even working. And at the end, you get a piece of paper to show for it that maybe can get you accommodation somewhere. But if that's a financial issue, if that is a access issue, if that's like an area, like there are areas of this country where we do not have specialists. If that is an access issue, you're not getting accommodations. Like, and especially at UConn, I feel like the CSD needs to realize, I mean, like, yeah, I might not have I'm fortunate that I have a diagnosis. I'm fortunate that I've been able to get all these tests at a young age. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has like people who will back them up with like an extensive medical history, because not everyone has access to doctors or have access to ask these questions. And if you start and they tell you up front, we can do these tests, but it might not change the outcome, that we don't know what's wrong with you or how to fix it. Why would you put yourself through those tests? Why would you spend the money, put yourself through those tests? A lot of them are painful. A lot of them take time. They all take money. And at the end, the treatment's no different.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. Like I'm very fortunate to have like the mother that I do have, and she was so willing to like spend the money for me to get treatments. Um, but there were times even with 3 insurances, um, I would get a bill for like thousands of dollars that we would just have to pay out of pocket. And I know even just in the journey to get diagnosed, like they told me like, oh, you can't do this test because insurance won't approve it. So I guess you just can't get it. Um, and then having to have that time to be able to fight with insurance and spend hours each week, like talking to them on the phone and trying to get everything worked out. It just seems like they don't really want people to get treated. They just want to like essentially save money. So a lot of people are denied that. And also just thinking about if you don't have access to insurance, especially like if you're undocumented, that sort of stuff, or just impoverished and don't have access to it, how are you supposed to get the medical treatment that you need? You're essentially just like pushed aside and forgotten by our healthcare system, which is just super unfortunate, especially because this is the land of opportunities. It's like what opportunities do you have? Like I know disability, everyone talks about welfare and like people exploiting welfare. Disability gives you like a couple $100 a month, to pay for everything, to pay for all this. And if you get married, you get that taken away because it's
Yep.
like your spouse makes too much, you don't qualify.
They keep us below the poverty line on purpose. You can't have more than $2,000 in your account or in your assets even, and there's no marriage equality for disabled people. So that's why, even though at the point where I probably am too sick to be doing as much as I'm doing every day, I know that I would be making less than minimum wage if I had to stop. If my body finally like just could not take it anymore, I don't know if I would be able to afford what I'm currently doing with my life.
Yeah, exactly. Like I know for me, like the medications I need just to get through the day in terms of like pain, um, and keeping my symptoms in check, that's like a couple $100 a month out of pocket. And that's every month for the rest of my life. It really adds up fast.
Prior to coming to UConn, I used to work in a pharmacy. And I worked in a pharmacy in both Texas and New Hampshire. Every day, every single day, multiple times a day, multiple times an hour. You have to tell somebody your insurance is not covering your insulin. You need to pay $1,300 or you don't get your insulin. And it's
That's a death sentence.
heartbreaking. It is the worst. It is. And I've worked in a pharmacy. I've been a customer at a pharmacy. And even that level of care is not consistent. Some people are like, yeah, that's the way it is, because I don't want to forgive those people. But it is something that you see every single day and you have to cope with. And some people cope by numbing that empathy. And is it wrong? Yes. I can't blame them either. And it just feeds into this vicious cycle that our healthcare system has created.
Yeah, and I know, especially if you look at the concept of addiction, a lot of insurance doesn't cover rehab or sober living. I know my brother has struggled his whole life with addiction, because of like the abuse of my dad and because of the conditions that we have. And there's a point where it was like, he's going to die if he doesn't go to rehab. And the only rehab we can get him into is $40,000 a month. And insurance does not pay for it. So my mother had to use up all of her retirement savings, had to take out a second mortgage on the house, had to use up like all the money that she'd saved for college for us, all of that. And like, if you don't have that option, if you don't have those savings, if you don't have the ability to do that, like you're literally gonna die.
And it's like, it's disgusting how people justify it. Like, people are okay looking the other way when we don't have access to afford medical and mental health care. Because I mean, for the people who work in the industry, like to some extent, you see this every day. Like, it's going to drive you insane if you can't like come to terms with that. That this is like kind of how things are currently operating. But on the other hand, like, the people that will like just not care when we are having like overdose crises, and when we were having like people not being able to afford life-saving medication, um, you can't really pull yourself out of that. That's not how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's move now to thinking about just how has your everyday life been impacted? Thinking about housing, dating, how has this been impacted by queerness and disabilities?
I came out as trans when I was dating somebody. Long story short, the relationship was not good to start with, so that didn't help. Um, and like the weird thing about being, I say weird, the difficult thing with my situation about being trans, being pre-medical transition, while also still closeted in most spaces, is that, sorry, things are going off in my other windows. But the difficulty with that was that my partner at that time accepted me. She was very supportive, but also was like, you're seeing my parents, I need you to dress like this. You're meeting my friends, I need you to dress like. She was fine with me being, as you might be able to tell, I'm wearing eyeliner because despite being a trans man, I do enjoy makeup. And she appreciated that when she was around like her and her friends. But when we were around her parents, she was like, you can't do that. And as and the boyfriend after that had the opposite of like, this was also in Texas. So like he talked to me about it and I was like, yeah, I also, if you are not sure how your parents are going to react, I am not going to be like, oh no, you should tell them. But yeah, so it's definitely been difficult. Thankfully, I've been with a partner coming up on 4 years now that like, she knows that I'm trans, she knows that I'm queer, and she has told me time and time again that she has accepted me for that. In myself now, and however I may change in the future, which is very touching. But then like housing, as you can tell, we're talking on Zoom. COVID was a real interesting experience. I mentioned during before the panel, I started medically transitioning in February of 2020, and I had told my mom prior to starting that I was doing it. And going back home, I realized I was like, I can't live at home right now with school and with everything else going on in my personal life at that time. So I went to go live with my partner in Pennsylvania. And I lived with her for 8 months from March until December of 2020. And it was during that time that I came out to my family, like fully, and was like, because I had told my family that I was trans, but they were not using my name or my pronouns. And it was only when I was in a safe housing environment where I wasn't relying on them, I was like, hey, I don't expect you to be perfect, but I need you to start trying. Which at the time was very, like, it did not go well, but now, like, now they're great. Like, they try. Like, they're not perfect, but they try. But yeah.
I agree with that a lot. Like with dating, like I mean, I didn't know that like as a trans person I had like options, but I also like really wasn't like it wasn't super important to me when I was like in high school. So like basically it was like, oh, do you want to go out with me? And I'd be like, sure. And then come to find out, oh, you're hiding the transness from your parents. Oh, you say you're a lesbian, but I'm just kind of like the next step in whatever you're figuring out. And I didn't sign up to be that. I mean, I get it, like identity exploration and everything, and I have no issues with that. But when you actively like keep me a secret, it did not make me feel great. And then I was kind of especially with COVID, I think my life would look very differently if COVID had not happened. But it unfortunately landed me in a very unsafe living environment, and it put a lot of like stress on top of everything, and I caused a huge falling out with my family. Which was like a kind of culmination of things. But then when I moved to campus, the only dorm that would take me was the GI dorm was not accessible to me. There's no first floor. My legal gender marker says male. I'm not comfortable rooming with cis men. I'm not comfortable rooming with cis women. I am not comfortable living on campus because they're going to charge me $3,000 for a meal plan, but I cannot eat any of the food because of my allergies. The food that I can eat is very, very limited in the scope of the dining halls because they're not really good about cross-contamination. And when I brought this up, I was still charged, and that was a financial issue at the time because I was trying to secure better living arrangements. The best advice was live off campus. And like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm really lucky now that I've for almost 2 years have been dating someone who's also trans, and it's honestly the healthiest relationship I've ever had. I didn't even know that like relationships could be like this. And I also never like had a goal of being in like a long-term relationship. I was not really looking for a relationship. It just kind of happened. But honestly, it is so refreshing to not have to explain important aspects of my identity to the person that I'm with, to feel respected and to feel safe and to have like a place of my own. That has probably been the most instrumental thing in my mental health is being able to feel safe and secure.
Yeah, that's definitely great. I know, especially thinking about the pandemic, like when if you're forced into your parents, like you have to stop dressing a certain way, you have to stop hanging out with certain people, doing certain things, and that could be very, very limiting. Um, in terms of coming out, like I still have not come out to my family. I'm sure they would be fine with it. It's just like a stressful conversation. It's also why do I have to like explain that to someone? And I know there are members of my family who very much would not be okay with that. And it's just like not something that I even want to bring up, thinking about that. And then in terms of housing, again, with that on-campus housing, yeah, it's like super expensive on top of it. And then if you can't use that meal plan, or if you can't use a lot of the stuff in the housing, it can be a real problem. Like there are not really any disability friendly dorms. I'm in Hilltop currently, and they don't have elevators. And I couldn't get a room on the first floor just because I do have a service dog, and the rooms that were available, they had cats or other animals, and they were like, well, we don't want to like risk it being a bad experience because of that. So it's just been very, very difficult. Trying, especially thinking about moving, like moving all my stuff up. Like I tore several muscles, my AC joint redislocated, all of that. And everyone in my family also has mobility issues. So it was just like super difficult to try to go through that whole process. And then on top of it, like I'm not supposed to raise my arms above my head because of my vascular issues. But like all of the storage is above my head. So it's like every day I have to go through the motions of like, am I gonna get really dizzy, pass out? Like, what's gonna happen every time I want to get it ish? And it's just a very difficult situation. And then thinking about off-campus housing, like when I go to visit other houses or other apartments, I don't bring my service dog because I know that people will say, oh, we don't allow pets here. We don't do that, because I've had people do that. I've had people deny me housing, especially like my last school, the University of Rochester. They were like, you're not allowed to have your dog as a service dog. So I had to go through the process of getting him as an ESA first. And then they also denied me that once I had the proper paperwork. And I had to speak with so many lawyers just to be able to get it to have him as an ESA, and not even as a service dog. And it was just very upsetting that to go through that process. It was so traumatizing, especially if you think about service dogs. There's always this fear because, again, like service dogs, they have to have a very rigorous set of training. And a lot of the training I did with myself or like other dog trainers that were not like the official service dog trainers, because thinking about it, every time I tried to find those, they were $10,000 out of pocket up front, and you'll probably have to pay more later. Trying to find a service dog, I tried to get one that was already trained. That's usually around like $10,000 to $40,000 out of pocket. And if you want to raise money, they're like, oh, that can take a couple of years usually, but then you won't have to pay that much out of pocket. It'll only be a few $1,000s. And it's like, I didn't have the time to do that. I didn't have the money to do that. So a lot of it, trying to get the training done, it was just a very stressful process, on top of like being a student, working, doing all this other stuff. And there's always this fear that someone's going to be like, oh, you're not like professionally trained enough for me, even though my dog, like he's very good out in public. He like doesn't have any issues. He knows all of his commands and all these things and how to help me. But there's always this fear in the back of my mind, because especially thinking about documentation, I've been to restaurants and they've been like, oh, if you don't have a certificate from the breeder saying that they trained it to be a service dog, like you're not allowed to be in here. And that's illegal. Even at UConn dining halls, I brought him to the dining hall and I had RAs come up to me and say, I need your ID. You're not allowed to have a dog here. And I showed them the laws saying like, hey, service dogs can go everywhere that I'm allowed, except for maybe if I'm in surgery. And they were like, oh, well, I have to talk to someone about this. And I like talked to CSD and they were like, that's weird, because RAs, like, they have to be trained to know where service dogs are allowed, and all that sort of stuff. And that's just like a big issue, especially like professors. I've had professors come up to me, call me out of the room, be like, hey, you're not supposed to have a dog here. Like, are you approved for that? It's like, I sent you my letters, like I sent you all this stuff. I'm approved to have a service dog. And even just going to events on campus, I've had security guards come up to me and be like, you're not allowed here in here. Absolutely not. Like, this is not okay. And I've had to go through the process of sitting there and waiting for them to get their manager, just for them to be like, oh yeah, actually you're allowed in, that's fine. But it's like every time I go to a restaurant or go somewhere, it's like, there's this fear in the back of my mind of like, am I going to be harassed? Am I going to be kicked out? Am I going to be like told like, oh, you're not allowed to be here, when I'm just trying to like go about my day and do my daily tasks, especially with housing. Like, again, I don't bring him there. When I first tour, I don't do any of that. And it's only once I've been approved that I say, I have a service dog. You have to let me have him. I'm not allowed to be charged anything, because I have unfortunately been through the process of seeing housing and brought him there, or I mentioned him. And they were like, oh, well, we don't allow animals, so you're not even allowed to apply here. And it's just been like a really big issue, especially because there's like such a visible difference in treatment when I have him and when I don't have him. Like I can see the judgment and the looks I get. And even just going to the store, I have, every time I leave my house, I have a bunch of people come up to me and like ask to play with my dog, or ask to do this, or they don't even ask and they just like start touching him. And it's like, especially for people where they can literally die if their service dog is distracted, it's like there's just not any education about that at all, which is really unfortunate.
What stuck out to me is like when you said like, oh, when the RAs are like, oh, the CSDs, like RAs are supposed to be trained. That's weird. And I'm pretty sure the conversation always stops there, because it's gonna happen again. When I went up to like dining services and I was like raising the like concerns, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we can talk to CSD about like, maybe like, do you have to be on this meal plan if like you can't, we can't guarantee that it's like safe for you. And then they came back to me and they're like, so turns out we've only waived the meal plan twice, and it was for students who were tube fed. So no. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is $3,000 of what? Like literally what is this for this one semester of food that you can't guarantee is safe for me to eat. And it's the same thing. They'll go back and they'll be like, well, we tried, or wait, I got to talk to someone else about this. And they put you like, that's obviously like not just inconveniencing you, but also like opening it up to like actual harassment. Like you don't need to prove your like, that's not a thing. Like you can't ask someone to prove why they have a service dog, and that's bullshit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry that both of you had those experiences off the bat. Just speaking about insufficient training. My memory is terrible. It might have been last semester or this semester. I can't remember which. The food pantry for food insecurity that USG was doing. Like they were very busy. I understood that. So I came back when it was less busy. But people were working there, taking people's IDs to like go like, match it up with like the envelopes and everything like that. When I had filled out the application, I gave Evan my name. But my ID, as everybody knows, the front is your legal name. And they were having trouble finding the envelope. It was the whole thing. It's fine. I got it eventually. But when they came out to like be like, hey, like we have a like whatever it was, they called out my legal name to a room full of people I didn't know. And I was like, cool. There's no way for me to be like I was outed in a room full of people. And I went to my I went to Cassie, who runs the Sexperts, and works as in part of health promotion. And I just told her, I'm like, I don't know who to talk to about this. And she was, she's like the sweetest person. She's like, I'm going to write to everybody that I know and can. Cassie's so ride or die. I love her. But she was saying like, when I think about it, when we're told to like scan IDs or whatever, we don't check the back for preferred name. And I'm like, correct. I have noticed. And she's like, that's really fucked. Like, she was very validating. But that similar thing of like, just because these policies are in place doesn't mean that people follow them or follow them correctly or do it in a way that is reduction of harm.
And because it's like not for someone who's like, who it's their job to check people in and they're like, oh, no dogs allowed, or oh, we have to go by the name on your ID, like that's just another second to them out of their whole day of like interacting with hundreds of people that day. But it's also that kind of thing where it's like, if you need resources to be able to fight discrimination, like you need people there who could vouch for you to say that this happened, who could, you need like money if you're going to take this like as like a discrimination case, like you need like to be able to say this is not just like oversight, but like that things need to change, or that like this is like should not like we're expected to just kind of like shrug it off and like be the bigger person and move on and ignore it. And it's tiring, especially because it's like it's not just like a daily inconvenience, it's like my life. And every time I like go to like when I was in the process of changing my legal name and I had different documentation said one name and the other one said another, and you have to go through every office individually and change everything individually, and everything was close to COVID. So obviously there was like some mismatches, and you go to like either like a healthcare setting or a UConn setting and be like, hey, like this is kind of what I'm dealing with now. And no one knows what to do. And that's like not their fault. Like no one knows what to do. But at the same time, like if no one knows what to do, and they're being nice to you, that's fine. But if no one knows what to do and then they're using that as an excuse to harass you, that's not fine, but you can't tell anyone.
Yeah, and I would even contest with the like, they don't know and they're nice about it and it's fine. It's like there's that distinction. Even when I was mentioning it to Cassie, it was just like the person who was working was doing his job. He was nice. He was trying really hard. Like, you know, I didn't have a problem with him. It was, this is an institutional problem, and that's what I have a problem with. And that comes with like, regardless of how he acted. If he acted like, you know, aggressive or not, like however that panned out, that would be secondary. Because that would be a result of,
Sorry, my
hey,
computer's
you
about to
don't
die.
know that this is a possibility.
Sorry, 1 second.
But like people didn't know like that, like that's a possibility. So that opens up the door to act however you want. And if you choose to act poorly, then that trickles down. But it comes from that top, like, hey, when you're doing this, here's some training.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, like if you give someone a 5-minute video that you watch and you passively click through, is that actually training? Do they actually know anything? Like there needs to be interactive, like interactive things where they can practice, like this is not okay to do, this is okay to do. And maybe just like even giving like personal stories, being like, this is what happens if you don't follow these rules, because you don't attach a face to it. You don't know like that you have that big of an impact on someone. It's just like a, oh, this happened. Oopsies. I guess next time I might know better, but maybe not. And if you think about it, like the concept of like disabilities, it's not like a person is lacking something or having this issue. It's the institution has made it so that they have an issue. If you give everyone the proper accommodations that they need, everyone's going to be on equal playing ground. Like no one is truly disabled. It's society that causes these disabilities. Like if I had proper accommodations for everything, I wouldn't get dizzy or pass out because I wouldn't have to do the things that cause that. Um, and if you think about it, like people with disabilities, we adapt, and we learn how to do things our own way to make it okay. But if there's these institutional regulations and rules in place that make it so we can't do that, and we can't have these different like pathways to get to that same end goal, it's just we're excluded from society. Especially if you think about like the 9 to 5. Okay, like the only time I can see my doctors is in the 9 to 5. And if my boss says, oh, you can't have the time to get multiple doctor's appointments a week like I need, I won't get the treatment that I need to be able to work. and then I won't be able to pay for my housing or my food or any of this. And it's all like tied together so that it's like a cascade of oppression. There's so many layers that go behind it. And yeah, it might seem like just like a minor inconvenience but unless you've actually lived it or seen the real effects that it's had on people, it's just you can't comprehend these issues and the way that people are impacted by them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just you mentioned like the 9 to 5. I remember this was several years ago. I was working retail. It was before I worked in pharmacy, but it was a convenience store. I won't say names. But I had slipped in the back room. And like it would have been a normal injury, except it was like the exact spot that was a prior injury, so it just cascaded and it was a whole thing. And I had to go to a special doctor for workman's comp, for them to be like, oh yeah, you are in pain, and I'm like, yes, thank you for noticing. I've been here for 3 hours. But after that, I did have work accommodations, so like I had to sit down out, like I couldn't walk around a whole lot, and so that meant I had to be on the register, which was fine, but I had to sit down. It was a whole thing, and I was like, I have documentation. Like this shouldn't be an issue. And it was just that like inhumanity of like, just a question, what difference does it make if I'm sitting down or standing up? I am ringing the person out. I am the fastest person here. You will be lost without me. Like, and but they care about productivity and they care about appearance. And it's like, oh, well, we can't have people like know that you're disabled. And I'm like, why? Just a question. Why? Why do you say it like a dirty word? Why do you say it like a bad word? And it's something that I'm learning for myself, and that it's only within the last, several months, couple years that I've able to say I have a disability. And I've been able to put in paper to the Center for Student Disability because I have one. But you have to get over so many internal hurdles and then like institutional hurdles and then like systematic medical, like you have all these barriers, and then we still get up every day. And we're still, or at least we try to be like kind and empathetic people. And that's like the strongest kind of person I know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I think about it is just like ability is a spectrum. Everyone has different abilities. Everyone has different things that they bring to the table. Just because I can't do one thing doesn't mean that I'm not useful to society. Capitalism kind of says like, unless you're able to be 100% effective 100% of the time, like you don't earn, you don't have, you're not enough of a person to deserve food or housing or healthcare. And unfortunately, that's kind of what it's come down to. And we're made to think of people with disabilities as like, where they're a burden to society, we're carrying them along, like they don't work, they can't do anything. It's like, okay, but if you look at it, the reason that some people aren't able to work is because these institutional oppressions are put in place. Or even if they're just not able to work because of their disability, that doesn't mean that they don't offer something to the world. Everyone has a purpose, everyone has a role in something. So it's like, why are we made to think of as less human, less deserving than everyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. Ashton just messaged me and he said that he's really sorry something spilled on his computer.
Oh God.
So that's why he had to go so suddenly.
Oh
So
God, I
he
hope everything
apologizes.
is
He doesn't
okay.
mean to be rude. And I'm like, I hope everything's fine.
Oh
I'm like,
jeez.
like the
Oh,
worst possible thing that could happen to anybody.
yeah, exactly. What the heck?
Oh, gosh,
Hopefully
but
the
yeah,
computer makes it through.
Oh, the fingers crossed.
Especially like nowadays, you kind of need a computer to do everything.
Which is a whole other thing, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like if you don't have access to computer, to a phone, how are you supposed to get a job? How are you supposed to do anything? Like,
thing. Yeah. Like I feel very fortunate that like prior to coming to UConn, when I was in community college, however many years ago, I had experience with online classes. Like half of my classes were
oh,
online because I went to school in Norwalk, and I lived in Ridgefield, which is like an hour away. And so like my mom's like, I'm not like you'll go 2 days a week, which is totally fine. But then obviously some classes like met more than that, or like summer classes, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a lot of experience with online classes. So I was okay. I was fairly comfortable. Um, but I saw able my able classmates and my disabled classmates struggling, and like I tried to be a resource to them, being like, this is kind of how you navigate things, but like there's a certain amount of self-discipline that comes with online courses, because if the lecture's recorded, you can watch it later, and so you have that flexibility, which is great for people with disabilities that maybe getting up at 8 a.m. is not the best idea all the time. But if your disability involves executive dysfunction, like certain types of like depression, ADHD, anxiety, that's not helpful. If anything, that's more of a hindrance, that's more of a barrier. And so it kind of ties into that, like CSD's one size fits all hurts some, helps others, but it hurts some. um, and they do their best with the limited staff that they have, but that's part of the problem, is that they have a very limited staff,
yeah,
so
especially
they're
if
not
it's
able to.
that
Yeah.
everyone needs those different accommodations. And if you don't have the time to like properly sit down and do the research and meet with everyone, um, not to mention students are also busy. Like we also have a life. We also have jobs, work that we need to get done. Um,
Yeah.
it's just, it's very trying to try to get everything worked out perfectly, or even not perfectly, even just like get to a manageable
Baseline.
level. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I was having that issue with housing we were talking about earlier. My housing for next semester. So CSD has always handled my housing prior to this coming semester, and this semester I got the email that was like, "Hey, you're part of general housing selection," and I was like,
Oh, geez.
"No, no." Every single other time CSD's done it, and they were like, "Oh, well, because of your early pick time, you should be fine. You should get the room that you want." So my housing selection was at 9:40 on Monday. So housing selection started at 9 a.m. So you would think 40 minutes. That should be fine. It was not fine. Um, and I was working on getting an updated letter, because right now I have my accommodations. I need a single room. But when UConn first put me in, because I came in the spring semester, spring 2020, it was like the off season. So they were kind of like, housing's a little bit difficult, which like I understand. Like people are already in their rooms. You can't kick somebody out. But they were like, so for your accommodation, you'll have a single room. You have to share a bathroom with somebody. And I was like, I mean, at this point, I'll take it. Otherwise, I can't go to school.
Yeah, yeah.
But then they had in the system that I could share a bathroom with somebody, which hadn't been an issue because CSC always covered my housing, so I always had a single bathroom.
Hmm.
And this semester, they're like, oh, well, because your accommodations say that you can share a bathroom, you can do general housing selection because you will get a single with a shared bathroom.
Oh,
And I was like,
geez.
oh. So then I emailed my coordinator at CSD, and I was like panicking. I was like, I'm waiting on my letter. Like, it hasn't been uploaded yet, but like, my therapist is on vacation this week. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and she was like, submit it when you get it and we'll work it out. And I'm like, did you know that my accommodation for a single room is because of my anxiety?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly.
to a certain degree, like they're doing what they can. Absolutely. Sometimes it doesn't always
Yeah, it
help
doesn't work
at the
out.
same time. Like they're
Yeah.
doing their best, but boy, it could, a little better. But then I also understand like limited staff, COVID doesn't help anything. Like I understand like the nuances. So then it's like that balance of like self-advocacy and being a Karen.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. No,
because
I
you don't,
definitely.
or even being perceived as a Karen, right? Like of just like I'm trying to advocate for my needs, and then people are like, oh, this person again. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to live my life.
I know. Yeah, I have to pull out my inner like white mom when I'm discriminated against. Like that's the only time I'll use that that persona. But like it can be
And you'll usually give
effective.
them like you'll give them like the three chances to kind of be like, okay, well, let's try the nice approach. Let's a little bit more, and then you're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
we're doing.
exactly. Once you're like outright blatantly discriminated against, it's like, I don't care, man. Like you can
You
perceive
don't like
me
me
as how
anyway.
you want. Yeah. Like I deserve the basic human rights. So
Yep.
what if you think like I'm an asshole or something? Like, like oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
One good thing I have to say is that for COVID, um, professors on like on an individual level, I found have been so much
Yeah.
more flexible.
Mhm.
And I had a professor because like I was struggling with my mental health fall 2020. Who wasn't? Um, but I didn't have academic accommodations at that point. Um, because of self gaslighting of like I don't need them. I've survived this long. Um, and I was struggling in a class, and I was talking to my professor. It was a completely asynchronous class. She just uploaded the lectures and you just did it in the week. So I hadn't talked to this woman at all besides like email. And she's like, "Well, come to my office hour. We'll set up a meeting. We'll talk." And I was like, "Okay, like, don't know how this is gonna go." One of the nicest people I've ever met. And she sat me down. She's like, "Okay, it sounds like you would need this, this, and this. Talk to dean of students. They'll like help coordinate all this. But I think like doing XYZ things in general will help you. For my class, I'll let you retake this one quiz that you did really bad on, and like I'll give you extended if the exam's on Thursday, you have until Sunday to do it. Like all these accommodations." And I was like, "Oh, you can do that?" And like I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, it's my class. I can do what I want." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, and then since then, my professor's been so great. Like I'm in Sec 2100 WQ with Stevenson. Um, Fantastic, great class. But he's like, "Listen, life's tough. Things are stressful." So he uh, live streams all his courses and then he uploads the recording afterward. And he's like, "And do your homework, but like, I'm not going to take late points off. Like, do it when you do it. If you have questions, like, let me know." But like, but I think it sparks more like, oh, okay, like I can learn rather than focus on completing work, because those are
Yeah,
two
exactly.
very separate things. Um,
It's also
and so like
like they
even like in,
totally have the ability to give these accommodations. They just don't want to.
yeah, and like even community college, I had a professor. This was before I got diagnosed with any kind of anxiety, mental illness, but I suspected like there's a certain point where we were like, I'm pretty sure I'm depressed. But I was talking to a professor. It was my economics course, and again, completely online. Had never met this man, and I was like, "Hey, I'm really struggling." And he's like, "Okay, you have the semester ends. It was the fall semester, so he's like, semester ends like December, whatever. Um, you have until 2 weeks until next semester starts, like 2 weeks before that starts, so like January, whatever, like middle of January." He's like, "You have until then to get your paper in. When grades go in, I'll just mark you down as an incomplete. But as soon as you get that in, I'll grade it and I'll adjust your grade, and no one will ever know that like you were late on that assignment. So I'm not going to penalize you for it." And he didn't ask for proof or like medical notes or whatever. Like he was just like, "I'm sorry you're struggling. Here, I'll do what I can."
Yeah.
And it's like those little things of like, even on like an institutional level, people may not do anything, but like individual professors, most of them are very good people. And I try to
Yeah.
hold on to that.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah, it's definitely, I think UConn's professors, especially, I've found they're a lot more accepting. Um, I think, yeah, I think UConn's professors especially, I've found they're a lot more accepting. Um, I think, yeah, I think UConn's professors especially, I've found they're a lot more accepting. Um, I think, yeah, I think UConn's professors especially, I've found they're a lot more accepting. Yeah, just I think because the university is like one of the top in terms of like disability accommodations and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So generally the professors are very accepting, but like I've definitely had experiences at other schools where they were not. And like that makes like a whole world of difference. Like if you're forcing me to take this exam while I have a migraine, like I'm gonna get it like 2 on it. Like I'm not stupid. I know how to do things. It's just like
Mhm.
there's certain things you can't help. And if you're not willing
Yeah.
to accommodate, like,
What am I supposed to do? Yeah.
yeah,
I had
exactly.
I had Lyme disease, and one of the symptoms of late stage Lyme is memory loss.
Oh, geez.
My family and I had Lyme disease at least a dozen times
Oh,
over
God.
our lifetime. Um, and most of it is because we don't get like the classic symptoms of early stage Lyme. So it develops to late stage Lyme, and we only
Yeah.
really notice when we're like, hey, I don't remember like anything. This is a problem. Like my
Yeah.
finances were getting messed up because I didn't balance my checkbook, like all these things. And it's,
Yeah.
but
No,
people
I
like
totally
professors
get
were
that.
great. They were like, wow, that sucks. Let's try to do something about that. And I'm like, cool, thanks.
Yeah. And even like
Um,
if you take away disabilities, like things happen to people. People should be accommodating, like no matter what. Is it going to be the end of the world if you give this exam like a couple days after everyone else took it? Like, even if people cheat, like, so what? Does it really
like
matter?
people will cheat regardless of what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and just make a different test.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I had a professor who was like, I took a different exam because I took it later. She's like, yeah, it's just not the same. It's not the same test, but it's like similar questions. Like, it's like, yeah, like it's not the most difficult thing to accommodate, in my opinion. But I'm also not a professor, so maybe I don't know that experience. But it
Yeah, yeah.
seems from a student perspective, doesn't seem that impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Even just like, I don't know, if a couple days later, like, are you really gonna remember everything that this one person on one test took? And do you know it's right? Like, eh, that's not really the case.
Yeah. In that
Yeah.
case, just don't release the grades until after everybody takes it. So
Yeah,
then people don't know
exactly.
if it's right or wrong.
Exactly. Oy. No, I think luckily, I think that with COVID especially, it's like opened up the conversation of like mental health, um, and that sort of thing. Because beforehand, like, I feel like if you brought up mental health, professors were like, "So, like, what?"
Everybody has rough days. It's like,
Yeah,
thank
yeah, exactly. Because I literally had a professor like with my connective tissue disorder, I was going to the geneticist and I'm like, I'm probably going to find out tomorrow, like if I'm going to die at 40 or if I'm going to like have a long life. And I had an exam like literally an hour or two after that. And I like emailed the professor and I was like, I don't think I'm going to be in a good mindset to like take this exam. Like I haven't been able to study much because I've been so worried about this. And they were like, so like, what? Just take the exam and see how you do. I'm like, okay, but this is my grade. Like, this is going to impact my future. Like, is it really that big of a deal if I take it at a different time? Like, when I'm not in a bad mindset, when I'm actually able to concentrate on things?
I I've been very fortunate that like because I went to community college, I didn't have to take a lot of gen eds. Um, so I was in like higher level like psych courses. Um, and one of my professors, I actually worked in her lab. It's the spirituality, meaning, and health lab, SMH, with Dr. Park, who I adore to pieces. Um, but both semesters that I worked in her lab, things happened as they do. And I wasn't able to do as much work as I said I was going to at the beginning of the semester. Um, and I was working with a grad student, so I had to tell both of them. I had to email both of them being like, hey, things are not going great, which is always a very humbling email to send. It's a very vulnerable email to send. Um, and both of them were like, yeah, do what you can. Your health comes first. Like, let us know if you need anything else, but like, if you do nothing this week, that's fine. Like this is the bare minimum you have to do. If you can do that, great. If you can't do that, then we can work something out.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh. And these are like very like prestigious, like academic people who I'm trying to impress. And they're like, yeah, just take care of your health. And I was like, oh, I can
Yeah.
do that. I shouldn't need permission from other people to take care of my health, but it's like that extra validation of like, oh,
Yeah,
that's nice
exactly.
that people support this decision.
Especially with like anxiety conditions. It's like you get in your head and you're like, oh, I don't see people talking about like, oh, let me bring this up. Let me bring up all the issues I'm having. It's like you think everyone's gonna be so like disapproving or like think differently of you, but it's like everyone goes through this. Like it's just kind of life. Um, but definitely society has conditioned us to be like, oh, I have to be perfect. I have to like do 60 hours of work a week plus being a student plus like living my normal life.
Yeah.
It's like that's just not possible.
Yeah.
And if it is, like, good for you, but like that is
Like,
not
I don't
the,
want it.
yeah, exactly. You got to think about yourself and think about like your health and like all the other aspects of being alive. If you're just pushing through life, like doing work because that's what you do, like you're probably not gonna have the best life.
Yeah,
It's all
it's
about
not gonna be a
balance.
happy life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought it was so surprising. Like I've been working at Pfizer and like one of the first things people were saying to me was like, okay, you need to have a balance though. Like you're working too much. Like you need to take time to do stuff so you're like able to function the times that you come in. Um, and especially like even in high school, I had a concussion. I was like, I can't ask this teacher for an extension because like what if they think less of me? What if they think like I'm not smart enough? And it's like, girl, you were like dying. Just give yourself a break.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Oy, oy. Yeah. Okay. So I think we're just about time.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep you for too long. But I really, really appreciated this conversation. I thought it was,
Oh, I appreciate it. These are all things that we don't talk about
yeah,
enough. So then
exactly.
to talk about the intersectionality of it, it's like, what a great day. Like, what?
I know this is
Like,
what I live for. Like,
I just want to thank you for putting this together and reaching out and having all the various offices reach out. It's such an important conversation, and it's so hard to have the space to do it,
yeah,
the space and time to be like, you are allowed to talk about this uncomfortable thing. It's like, oh
yeah,
my God. And like a group of people will have a shared experience. And you're like, oh my God, other people do this? Other people feel like this? And it's like, yes,
right.
you
I
need
know
to
it's like
talk to them.
gotta talk about the uncomfortable. So it's not
Mhm.
uncomfortable anymore.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good luck with
Thank you
finals and everything.
too.
I
Yeah,
really
and
appreciate
moving
this.
out and everything else.
Yeah, right. I know it's so tedious, but good luck with everything.
Thank you, you too.